This sense of psychological safety was the number one factor for high-performing teams. Their shares outperformed those of the stock market average. But you can really multiply the impact of your thank yous if you add a couple of things on. There's a Harvard study that found the biggest difference between the best days at work and the worst days at work was feeling a sense of progress.
Welcome to the Lunch at Work podcast, where we talk to experts about how to make workplaces better. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Lunch at Work podcast. You are an expert in what I would call the art of positive psychology, and you've worked with a significant number of well-respected individuals and organizations and helped them kind of practically apply your ideas to get the best from themselves and their teams. You're also a member of the board at Action for Happiness. What is Action for Happiness?
It's a social movement, really, and we're there to take this great research in the last kind of couple of decades in particular, the amount of psychological and neuroscientific research and economic research that has gone into, what happens when we feel good, and what the impact does that have, and how do we get to feel good and function well in the first place? There's been tons of real research that has practical application, but it's no good sitting in the academic papers because, who's going to sit and read those? So we exist as taking those things, and a lot of my work is about how do you make those ideas really simple and practical, communicate them in simple and practical ways for people to put in their own lives. And it's also about helping people, boost their own well-being and happiness, and indeed resilience.
What actually is happiness then?
Well, I think it's an interesting question for any of your listeners. I mean, for anybody listening to this, thinking about what does happiness really mean to you? Now, of course, there is the kind of thing that brings a smile to our face, joy or pleasure, some really nice meal or food. I'm a foodie, and I know the podcast is going out to people who are really to food and the food industry. But that's kind of happiness in the moment, happiness in the short term, if you like. But what is, an important part of happiness really is about longer term fulfillment, about contributing to something meaning, like feeling like you're contributing to something more than just, momentary pleasure for yourself. It's about fulfilling your potential and feeling a sense of that kind of satisfaction with life, a sense of fulfillment. And we actually need a blend of those two. And the interesting thing is if we're working towards meaningful goals or making the most of our potential, so taking on new challenges, etc., even working on our relationships, that's not always easy. Those things don't always feel good. We'll have struggles and challenges and maybe even conflicts along the way. So a little bit of the kind of pleasure and the kind of short-term happiness actually literally, scientifically does help us along the way to longer-term fulfillment. So I think it's those two things. It's both pleasure and fulfillment might be kind of simple ways of thinking about it.
Okay, so happiness equals pleasure plus fulfillment in a very small way.
Yeah. Or short and long term, in the moment and looking back, if you like.
So you spoke about Action for Happiness being the science of positive psychology, related to the science of positive psychology as opposed to the art, as I mentioned. Why is the science behind it so important?
So the science gives us some assurance and credibility that this stuff works. It helps distinguish from all of the kind of great advice and, promises that are out there. And sometimes it's, let's just think positively and ignore what's wrong. But what are the things that have got a greater likelihood of making a difference? And just because it's made, it's shown to be effective in scientific experiments doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for you, but it gives you a little bit of a firmer footing, I think. And I always encourage people to actually think like a scientist, try some of this stuff out, give it a go, for a week or whatever, or, however long is right, and then notice how it feels, adjust it, tweak it for yourself, and then try that.
At BM, where I work, at BM, happiness is kind of in our DNA. We are hugely focused on our culture or, every business decision that we make is prefaced with the question, how is this going to affect our teams? And for us, that certainly works, but not every business thinks that way. Why should leaders care about the happiness of the individuals within their organizations?
Happiness makes good business sense. A recent study found that if you took sort of the top, using a kind of indicator of happiness at work, so how happy people felt, plus some other dimensions of that, and track the top companies in those on that index, and then almost bought shares, created a stock market portfolio of those companies, and compared that to the average performance of the stock market, they outperformed the companies that are the happiest companies. Their shares outperformed those of the stock market average. That's a very recent study. There was an earlier study by Alex Edmonds, who's a finance professor at London Business School, and he did a similar thing. He took the 100 best companies to work for, which is another well-known index, and he tracked the share prices, the earnings per share of the 100 best companies to work for. This is looking in the US, and compared them to their stock market peers. And the earnings per share of the 100 best companies to work for outperformed every year for over a 26-year period. So it's not just a flash in the pan or a slight one period in time, but over a long period of time. And there's other research that has shown that client satisfaction, profitability, reduced staff turnover all increase when people feel happier at work. And there's other studies that have shown that happier people who are happier day to day at work are more productive. There was a lab study done. It's a really causal study, so it's not just correlation. Causal study showing that people doing work who had better moods were more productive than their less happy peers. And another very recent study, and we're getting some really much better quality studies. It's very hard to kind of study things robustly in organizations because it's hard to control the environment, because it's a dynamic, as you know, environment that's got other focuses other than psychological research. But there's another recent study that was done in call centers, in real call centers, on 6 different sites, and tracking how happy people are and their productivity. And the great thing about call centers is there's loads of data. And they found that, for example, happier employees had 13.4% higher sales. So this stuff really translates. But it's not just that. You know that people who are happier are more likely to be physically healthy. So they're less likely to catch a cold. They're less likely to have cardiovascular disease. They're more likely to take care of their health. So, and we know that actually sickness absence is actually rising in the UK, certainly in the UK. And a lot of it's to do with stress and mental ill health. So actually, in the opposite of mental ill health is happiness in a way. So we know that when colleagues are off work, not only is it it's not good for them, but it's also not good for the organisation because other people have to pick up the slack. It has a cost to it. And we also know that when people are happier at work, they're more likely to contribute in their communities. So I would argue that caring about happiness of employees at work is a corporate social responsibility, because you don't just leave how happy you feel, at the kind of door, when you leave work. You actually take it home. It affects how you interact with your family, your friends, how well you engage with activities outside of work, how likely you are to help other people in your community. So happiness it might seem a kind of nice to have, but actually it's pretty fundamental in both performance at work, performance of individuals, health, and our communities.
So there's a really big butterfly effect then. It's got a really big ripple.
So the studies have shown, this comes from a big study that was done out of Harvard in the sort of medical research area. Actually, was looking at health behaviours and how they ripple out to real social connections. And they found that our mood states had a significant ripple effect out for 3 degrees of separation. So how I am with you is not just affecting you, how you feel, but it'll affect the people you go to speak after this and the people they go on to speak with, and vice versa. So if you think about that in an organisation, and in the sort of work that BM does, you're a lot of your people are client-facing, customer-facing. You can make a difference between those clients having a good or bad day by just being friendly and warm. You don't have to be kind of rah, rah, rah. And maybe you might be thinking, well, actually, what happens if I'm having a bad day? Do I have to be... So it doesn't mean those smiley faces all the time, but it means that perhaps we all need to be aware of how we're feeling in the moment and have tools and strategies to manage that appropriately so that we're not having a unnecessary impact on other people, when we're having a tough day, and that we can get support and help. And we need it. So this is really important for people both in the workplace and outside the workplace in our relationships, and if we're a manager or leader. But you can really multiply the impact of your thank yous if you do add a couple of things on. So instead of saying, oh, hi, Michaela, thank you for helping me develop that new menu. So that's our normal sort of thank you. But if you then add, it really helped me because it helped me meet my deadline for that, and and it really contributed some really interesting new ideas that I know our customers are going to love. So the impact it had for the recipient on you as a recipient. So that's adding meaning. So it's really adding meaning and kind of amplifying that appreciation, and then add a strength or a quality that that act of kindness demonstrates. So when you help me with those get the menus sorted for next week, it really added some creativity and some fun to the menu. It shows that you're a really creative and thoughtful and kind colleague. So it's those things. So it's like, so thank you for the thing that person's done, the impact it had for you and more widely, and the qualities that you've observed in the person because of that. Then you really amplify the impact of that thanks, the meaning, and having a sense of meaning is really important in the workplace. So, that's or at home. So I do a practical tip. That's what I love about all this stuff is.
Some research that I've done, and please feel free to correct me, we spend around 90,000 hours working over our lifetime.
Yeah.
And if you're the type of person who dreads going into work, 90,000 hours is a long time to have that feeling of dread. Yeah. And like you've said earlier, whilst it's up to every individual to kind of create their own happiness, being in a workspace that promotes well-being and has a positive culture is a great first step to 90,000 hours of happiness, which is a great title for a book, and I'm going to use it if you do it. Do you have a top 3 tips that leaders can use to implement to ensure that their team members have a really positive experience at work?
I'm really glad you've asked this question, because our frontline managers, the person that manages us, is the person that has perhaps the biggest influence. As a starting point, there are 3 core psychological needs that every human being has, regardless of age and cross cultures, but they're particularly pertinent. I find them very relatable to at work. So the first is a sense of, we all need a sense of connection, to feel seen, not cut out, to be considered. So a tip for managers there is simply, listen perhaps more than you talk, take an interest in your colleagues. So that's that sense of connection. The second is a sense of control. Now, we all need a sense of control. Now, often when I'm working with organisations, I ask people to think about their time, a time when they felt really good and were performing really well at work, and what conditions contributed to that. So as well as that sense of connectedness, is having a sense of control. So knowing what you've got to do, but have some level of discretion in some aspects of your job about, to do it how you feel best. So one of the worst things managers and leaders can do is micromanage. So, and it's even like things like, do this or do that or whatever. without actually asking people, have you thought about how you're going to approach it? What are your thoughts and ideas? Now, thinking about how can you cultivate a little bit of choice and freedom, volition in some aspects of people's jobs, seeking people's ideas, whatever it is. And the other another thing is thinking about how can you support people in feeling a sense of competence and mastery. So this can be there's a Harvard study that found the biggest difference between the best days at work and the worst days at work was feeling a sense of progress. And this is not achieving your kind of monthly goals or your quarterly goals or your annual goals. This is micro progress on a daily basis. So as a manager and leader, I mean, one leader I know made his weekly meetings with individual team members, sit down and say, is it right, what's on your to-do list next week? What are the things that you most want to get done next week? And what's something that might get in the way? And how can I help clear that blockage? So how do you kind of clear blockages to progress on those things? And the other thing is find out this is the fourth thing, is what I call, I have a model of 5 C's, which is we've looked at connection, control, competence and mastery. The fourth C is about contribution and meaning. I mean, what do each of your... So firstly, help people see how what they're doing matters and contributes to something larger, both within the organisation and beyond. But also find out, what... So that's often not enough. So it's nice to know that I'm contributing to something bigger, that what I do, my role makes a difference. But also what's meaningful for each of your individuals in their own jobs, because what's meaningful for you in your job might be different to me. Just to complete this, I'll add the 5th C, which is about constructive emotions. And that is how do we kind of create net positive emotional environments? So where places feel good, but it's not, and I say net positive. This is not about ignoring niggles, things that are wrong, difficulties that we might be having outside of work that are affecting how we feel inside it. But it's actually how do we can we raise those, acknowledge them, support where we can, but also look at what's working well. There's some really interesting research that's getting more and more importance now in organisations. It's called psychological safety, and this came from a researcher called Amy Edmondson. She was actually working with hospital teams and looking at what contributed to kind of high performance in the hospital environment. And they collected all this, she and her team collected loads of data, were analysing it. And one thing didn't make sense, in that the teams that on lots of different factors were reported as high performing seemed to have the highest number of errors and mistakes. And she was like, this can't be wrong. We must have got this, it can't be right. We must have got this wrong. We go back and dig into it. But they found actually no, it was right. Because what happened is the highest performing teams were able to kind of raise concerns, raise issues, share ideas. So, if they made a mistake, they could actually bring that up and ask about how to improve it, whatever. They didn't hide it away. And the poorer performing teams, those mistakes got hidden. And Google have looked at this research and they found that this sense of psychological safety was the number one factor for high performing teams. It didn't matter what the personalities were, whether people socialise outside of work or not, but psychological safety. And they said some things kind of exhibited that. Clearly everybody knows what they're doing and how they contribute to that. The second is that, in the course of working together, people had equal voice. It wasn't just the loudest voices shouting the loudest. The quieter people were kind of invited to share ideas and things like that. And there was a higher than average social sensitivity, so that people noticed when something wasn't quite right. It might be, oh, Vanessa, you're not quite yourself today. You seem a bit quiet, or you're a bit off kilter. Kind of you're not as fast as you normally are. Is there something going on? So they just checked in. And also the managers and leaders were prepared to bring something of themselves. So sometimes they would share, well, actually, I don't have all the answers. What are your ideas? Or I'm not having a great time outside at work at the moment, so forgive me if I'm a little bit, kind of short or whatever. So they showed some kind of human vulnerability. And it's that human side. It's recognizing that we are emotional creatures. I don't mean kind of, but we all have emotions.
Your points about, I guess, almost pushing things under the rug, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. You don't learn from those mistakes. So if we're feeling psychologically safe, we get to fix those mistakes early on and move on and grow and do the next thing. Right. So back to Action for Happiness. Action for Happiness emphasizes the importance of connection and community. How can a communal dining experience, like what we do supplying workplace restaurants, for example, enhance the sense of belonging and well-being amongst employees?
I love this question. I mean, I really love this question because, as you know, and as I said, I'm a foodie, and I think kind of cooking and eating together is really an important, fundamental part of life. So certainly we know that, like I've said that earlier, that core psychological need to feel connected.
It's interesting because we eat together at home, don't we? If there are events, family events, Christmas, whatever it is, we get together, we eat food, we're happy together, and we have, great conversations. And I feel like it's the same at work.
Yeah, I think having a sense of belonging in the workplace is one of the top drivers of happiness at work. Human beings are designed to be social, whether you're introvert or extrovert. We all need to feel connected and seen. So that might mean different things for different people. But I think that experience of dining together and mixing it up a bit. I mean, there's a tendency, I think I would imagine that many of us have a habit around our kind of when we eat lunch or breakfast, or whatever. We'll go and sit with our team members, or we'll sit on our own with a book, or whatever. And of course, it's important to take a break, connect with your colleagues outside of work. What about mixing it up a bit? When we have a pleasant emotional experience that has both a physiological and a psychological effect, it literally broadens our perceptual fields. We're more open to others. We're more open to ideas. We are more creative at problem solving. We're more resilient, and it builds and builds and builds. Those things that builds. So, and when we actually share a pleasant moment with someone else, whether that's someone we know well or somebody that's a stranger, that effect is actually amplified. It increases because we have a kind of physiological reaction. We produce oxytocin, for example, when we share a pleasant emotional experience with someone, which further attunes us to others, increasing the likelihood of those more pleasant interactions. So there's a psychological and physiological effects to sitting next to somebody for lunch and having a little bit of a chat. And also, from a career perspective, it's great for networking, it's great for communication, it's great for ideas and innovation. I mean, it's critical for innovation. I used to do work for one of the top branding agencies, and they really invested in excellent food and communal spaces to eat and encouraged people to mix up because of the impact on creativity. Swedish workplaces, and Sweden is always comes out as one of the happiest countries to work for. They get great reputation in their workplaces. They have this thing called fika, which is sharing coffee, maybe cake with colleagues where you don't talk about work, so these kind of moments of connection are really important. It's about, again, us as whole people, not just as kind of cogs in a kind of, an industrial machine, as it were.
Vanessa, you have written books on the subjects of happiness. You have some behind you on your shelf. You've also done a lot of consulting with organizations on how to bring out the best in their people. Do you have any, I know you just spoke about, working with one of the leading brand agencies. Do you have any success stories on how you've helped a particular business change for the better?
I actually really like the personal stories, the small stories that people share. I mean, I sometimes run a program which is, get together for a day or half day, whatever, with managers and leaders, and then they choose something to experiment with their teams, and then come back and share that, share how it's gone, and we continue with small learning, etc. And lovely stories from that. People saying, well, the only thing I work in a really leader saying, a manager saying, I work in a really, really busy, quite tense environment, and I'm always multitasking when my team come in, like this, or on the phone, whatever, half listening. And the simple thing, the thing that was simplest for me to experiment with was simply when somebody comes to talk to me, my team members, is just literally turning and facing them instead of multitasking. Stop what I'm doing, face them. Even if it was to say, I've got to get this out in the next 10 minutes, but I'll come back to you. Of course, making sure she goes back to them. Went back to them. And she said in the 3 weeks that, this is between sessions that I was running, she said in the 3 weeks that between the sessions, I had more engagement, more kind of got a more positive sense of my team than in the 6 months before. Just simply because I think I was giving them my full attention. It's that sense of connection. It's communicating those kind of moments, small moments, positive connection. We don't have to be gleeful, but they're just saying, I'm taking an interest in you. It communicates. You matter. I care about you. I want to hear what you've got to say. And that is so powerful. In fact, there's been research that shows that small moments, these small moments of connection like that, just taking, stopping, giving you my full attention for a few seconds, add up to both individual well-being and performance, team performance, and organisation bottom line performance. So this is not benign. Another manager said he took this idea. There's a really great simple practice that people can try. Probably some of your listeners already do, but reflecting at the end of the day on 3 good things that happened that day, and maybe a note or two on why they happened or why they were good. Just a couple of minutes a day. But doing that each night for a week has shown to boost people's well-being over a period of 6 months that the measurements were taken. Boost how happy they feel and reduce how feeling down. Why? Because our human brains, and the human brain's hardwired to focus on what's wrong. There's a whole evolutionary explanation for that. So this is actually training our brain not to ignore what's wrong, but to also notice what's right. So a manager kind of took, one of the managers I was working with, he had a big team of kind of field engineers, sort of the earth, whatever. And when he had team meetings with his supervisors each week, he said, I told them to bring one good thing. He said, I didn't want to do 3 too much, one good thing. He said, team thought I joined a happiness cult to begin with. He said, but they started to do it. They humoured me, and then as the weeks progressed, they started to kind of be ready with their thing, not moan and groan, and be really interested in hearing other people's. He said, we started our meeting with those. We still got to the problems and issues, but instead of just focusing on those, we actually got to know each other. We felt connected. We got better ideas about how to deal with the problems. And we're more engaged, and the meetings are simply actually more enjoyable to be in. So just things like that. And then, and just those small practices starting to add up to shifting the culture.
And I can imagine what that ripple would have been, for the first manager who just simply looked at the person while she was talking to them, the ripple on that and the benefit to the 3 degrees of people that, that team member would have taken with them. I'm sure would have just been huge. Do you have a cure for the Monday blues?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would say, I'd just talked about, for example, that idea of writing down 3 good things. So why not kind of think about that in advance? Think about, it's called anticipatory savouring. It's actually, the language is quite food oriented, isn't it? It's actually thinking about what are 3 things I could reasonably expect to look forward to. I mean, for most of us, it's not exactly likely we're going to get a kind of out of the blue massive bonus, but it could be actually 3 things we're going to do. I'm going to, try and sit down at that communal table and have a nice conversation with someone. I'm going to share, listen to somebody's ideas or whatever, or, put into practice, and whatever it is just 2, 3 things that you could reasonably look forward to that week, and then just make a note of those and try and make them happen. So I would, it's what I would do. And also we have to get geared up to kind of put in effort. The weekend we might be doing, fun things or things that we find less effortful. So on a Monday, we've got to kind of gear that effort up. It's a bit like doing exercise. We have to kind of gear up. But once you get going, so what are little practices or routines that work for you? What's something fun you could do to start your day? So many of us will just get straight into emails or get, kind of looking at messages, whatever. But maybe is that really the best way to start your week? Could you kind of protect the first hour of your week or the first half hour of your week to do something that you find enjoyable, help you feel like you're making progress? It could be thinking really thinking about, kind of what you want to achieve that week, and one thing that's going to really help you take a step towards it. What's the most important thing you want to achieve that week, and what can you do to take a step towards that? Helps you feel that sense of progress talked about earlier. Is there something you want to learn? Could you read an article on that? Is your first thing. Could you, as another idea, picking up on something we talked about earlier, who's people I want to thank today that really helped me last week? Could I start my day off with actually saying thank you to some people?
And my team specifically, we've got maybe 3 things that kind of, for me anyway, work quite well, because it's not necessarily that I get the Monday blues, but it's hard to transition from the fun, exciting, relaxing weekend. Bang, Monday comes and you've got to switch over to work mode. It's difficult, right? So there's a few things that we do. I try and go into the office now every Monday because I have a really good time with my team when I'm there, and I know that I'm going to have that good time. We do have a first thing 9:00 Monday morning meeting, but we start the meeting with 10 minutes of just chat. How was your weekend? What did you go up to? What stories do you have to tell? And the other thing, which is a little bit silly, but we all get excited about it, is there is a bubble tea shop downstairs at the office. And it's not necessarily that the team and I really love bubble tea. It's just that it's something fun to think about. So most Mondays we'll kind of spend the day going, oh, almost 3:00, bubble tea time, So it's just something really fun that we can sort of think about. Right, last thing. Do you have any books or podcasts or people that you'd like to recommend as, good people to listen to or research on if you want to be happier at work or in general?
I would say either the books, the 10 Keys to Happy Living or List Happy, they're not specifically work oriented, but there's lots of ideas there that can be, and they're written to be super practical, that dip in, dip out of, and there's a little bit about the science if you want to find out a bit what's behind some of these ideas, but there's lots of ideas for practice. And the Creating the World book, I wrote the chapter on work, and that's where that sort of 5C framework is explored. So that's good. But the Action for Happiness, then again, not specifically work related, but Action for Happiness has twice monthly free webinars that we ask people to donate to. But if you're struggling, we don't want to exclude anybody. So there's a whole library there of talks that on different topics. There's a free. We haven't talked about the 10 Keys to Happy Living, which is the framework I created, but maybe a subject of another podcast or whatever. But this is the framework that we use for Action for Happiness, the areas to take action in. The acronym's Great Dream, the 10 Keys. But there's lots on the website, the book's based on it. But there's also a little free 10 Days of Happiness program. So that if you go onto the Action for Happiness website, or Days of Happiness, you'll find it's a little we call it a micro coaching program. So it's you find out about one of the keys each day, little animation, and it gets you to write down how you're going to apply that, and little action you're going to take that day, and it gives you nudges about it. And certainly studies have shown that the people that are completing that over 10 days gives actually people quite a boost on well-being. So it could be sort of a fun thing the team does together. And there's also, based on the 10 Keys, Action for Happiness produces these monthly calendars based on one of the 10 keys with tiny micro actions, and they're translated to, here's one here, Active April, but of course they're online and they're free to download, or you can get the Action for Happiness app, which is also free, that has those tiny micro actions that you can do each day. So I would do those, of course, the books Great gifts for your team, great to explore with your team, workplace book clubs, that sort of thing. But there's lots of other resources there. And, I can go on forever with a whole host of different kind of people to follow and stuff, but that will get you started.
I think as well that both you and Action for Happiness have a really good social media kind of following, and you put a lot of really good content out there, just kind of explaining various ways to do things and how to become happier, and which are really, really interesting. So I definitely recommend anyone to give those a follow and have a look. If anyone is interested in getting in contact with you or finding you, where can they find you?
Well, you can contact me at vanessa.king@actionforhappiness.org or vanessaking@thechangebase.com, which is also my personal business address as well. But Vanessa, if you Google Vanessa King Happiness, you should find me. So
what a great top hit on Google to be.
I've never tried Vanessa King Unhappiness. Maybe I should try that.
So you have been an absolute dream to talk to. Thank you so much. We could go on for ages, but I have already taken up more time of yours than I said I would. So I hugely appreciate it. And I'm sure that everybody listening has learned a whole lot and can take some really good practical ideas, practical sort of key takeaways of how they can become happier at work and how they can lead their teams to become happier at work as well. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. So, yeah.
This podcast is powered by BM Caterers. Contacting BM is the easiest way to start your journey to a better workplace experience. Click the link in the description for more info.